everyone. I hope you can all see and hear me. If you can, please just type into the general chat so I know that everything is working. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So welcome to tonight's event. I want to wish you good evening if you're joining us from Asia or Hong Kong, and a good morning if you're joining us from Europe. I know that some of you are. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, I hope you can all see my PowerPoint. So welcome to tonight's event. This is our first virtual developer event, and we are very excited to be kicking this off today with the coding machine. Now, it is our first developer event that's hosted online, but it's not our first virtual event. So here at Wanted, we've actually been doing a lot of virtual events given the current situation, but first one for developers, and we are very excited to have all of you join us today and to be doing this as well with the coding machine. So quick introduction, my name is Kirsten and I look after events for Wanted. So those of you who don't know what Wanted is, we're a social recruiting platform that leverages referrals. So if you or your friend is looking for a job, you can refer a friend and earn cash rewards. But as well as that, we have actually kickstarted an education platform. So for anything career related, for courses, for career development, you can have a look on there and there's a little bit more information which we hope you'll find useful. But in regards to today, this is the agenda. And we will soon be inviting David Negrier, who is the CTO and co-founder of the Coding Machine. And he's actually based in Paris, France. So the great thing about having a virtual event is anyone can join us. So we're very lucky to have David join us today and to share his insights and tips on everything to do about GraphQL. We'll also have an interactive link for you guys to try it out for yourselves so you can put into practice a little bit of what you've learned today, which is very exciting. Then at about 7:15 p.m., we'll go into the Q&A session. So this is a chance for all of you to ask David your questions. Do take advantage. He is an expert in this field, so a great person to be asking. Then at about 7:25, we will have Charles and Xavier from the Coding Machine here in Hong Kong come on to just talk a little bit about what the Coding Machine is currently doing. At the end of that, at 7:30 p.m., the networking room will be open again. So if you do want to stick around for networking, I will explain a little bit more about that, how that works. But it's a pretty cool function, and I hope you guys find it useful whilst we're all doing a bit of social distancing. So hopefully all of you can see a screen like this. So just explain to you a couple of the functions of this platform that we're using today. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the chat function. So this goes out to everyone who's on the platform. So if you want to have any comments or anything that you want to say, do feel free to use that. However, for your questions, have a look at where the yellow arrow is pointing to. There's a tab that is called Q&A. So please type your questions into here and it will look a little bit like this. So here's just a sample question that I put together before. And if you have a look to where the arrow is pointing at now, you can actually vote for your favorite questions. So as you upvote those questions, the number will start to increase. And the questions with the highest number of votes will go right to the top. And those are the ones we'll get answered first for you guys. So that's how the platform works for now. And without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce to you David Negrier, who is the CTO and co-founder of the Coding Machine. And he is going to be talking to you about how to leverage the power of GraphQL in web development. So David, whenever you're ready, it's all up to you now.
Yeah. Hi, Kristen. Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be with you guys today. So we will be talking today about GraphQL and how it changes the way you work with web development. And I'll also be doing a zoom on the GraphQL ecosystem in general, and more particularly in PHP, because this is my domain of expertise. So I'll start my screen. You should.
Hi, everyone. It looks like David actually dropped off for a second there. So I have a feeling he might have pressed the wrong button, but he will be coming on shortly. Just chatting with him now to see what's going on. So apologies for that, but he will shortly be coming back. Great thing about virtual events, anyone can join, but sometimes there's tech difficulties. Okay.
I'm back. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll try again sharing my screen, and I won't move between the two screens, and everything should be fine this time. All right. Okay. So I'm pretty sure this is okay this time, right? Can everybody see me? Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get started. Sorry for the delay. So yeah, as Kirsten introduced me, I'm David Negri, I'm CTO of The Coding Machine. I am a PHP enthusiast. I've been doing a lot of stuff in the PHP community, especially I'm the co-editor of PSR11, which is a standard related to interoperability between frameworks. And lately, for the last 2 years, I've been playing a lot with GraphQL, and I've been the author of the GraphQLite library, which is a PHP library that helps you do GraphQL easily in PHP. So today we will see, well, first, what is GraphQL? Then we will be talking a bit about the GraphQL type system, the GraphQL ecosystem, and finally an introduction to GraphQLite. So let's get started. What is GraphQL? You need to understand that GraphQL is a protocol, okay? It's not a fancy new database, even if it does finish with QL. It's not a database query language, it is a protocol. And a protocol is something that enables two machines to communicate, okay? And so GraphQL is a challenger to other protocols, like REST, for instance, or web services. If we have a look a bit at history, in circa 1999 came web services, what I called WSDL-based web services. It was a protocol that was really strongly typed. It was self-describing. It means that if you're given a URL to a web service, you know how to use it because the documentation is kind of bundled into the web service. The problem was that it was really, really difficult to use. It is XML-based. You need to know a lot of things about XML namespaces, XSL. Basically, you need to have a PhD to be able to understand how it works. Really powerful, but really difficult. And as a knee-jerk reaction to web services came the REST protocol. And the REST protocol is the exact opposite of web services. It is weakly typed. It is non-self-describing. It is the most simple thing you can imagine. It is using JSON, which is another format to communicate between machines, which is really easy. The problem with REST is that, well, it's easy to crash with REST because it is completely loosely typed. And basically, when you're given an API endpoint, you don't know how to use it, and it is very easy to use it in a poor way. And as a reaction to that came, about 5 years ago, GraphQL. And GraphQL is strongly typed, just like web services. It is self-describing, just like web services, It is JSON-based. It is much easier to use on web services. It is really easier. And well, it has client-driven queries that none of web services and REST has, and I will be talking about that a bit later. So if we want to make a little joke, and if you get a fusion between SOAP and WSDL web services and REST, you might get something that looks a bit like GraphQL. It's my interpretation. A lot of people would not agree with that, but I kind of find that funny. So where does GraphQL come from? It was first developed by Facebook, and it was first used in the Facebook API. And then they started opening the protocol, sharing it with the world, and now GraphQL is an open protocol that is backed by the GraphQL Foundation. A lot of companies have stakes into the GraphQL Foundation. So it's not a Facebook thing anymore. It's shared with the world, and it is really an open protocol. So why would you use GraphQL? Well, to understand that, we will see a little scenario and what happens with a REST API. Okay, so here we have three people. We have Dan, he's a product owner of a marketplace. Alice, which is a front-end developer, and Bob, which is a back-end developer. So Dan here wants to change the marketplace, and he wants to display the company details on the product page. So on the product page, he wants to display some details about the company. So he asks that to Alice. And Alice will say, oh, oops, the API endpoint for the product page does not have the info I want. I'm getting this information from the backend. I'm getting the name and the logo of the product, but I don't have any details about the company. What am I gonna do? Alice has many options using REST. The first solution would be to make another query to the REST API to the company endpoint to get the company details. The company ID is 35, so afterwards she can do another query to get the company details. That would be cool, but it's not ideal. Basically, you need to do two requests instead of one. So you're increasing the latency and the performance of your application will be degraded. And this is what we call underfetching. Basically, the product here, the product API here is not fetching enough data, it is underfetching. So basically, you need to do an additional request. Hopefully, Alice has another solution, and it is still REST. She can go and ask to Bob, hey, can you change this API for me? And basically, Bob could change the REST API so that the company details are returned when you ask for a product. And that would be perfectly valid REST. The problem with this second approach is that some users of the API may not need all the data we are returning. Okay, we add more data in the product API, but maybe not all screens or not all consumers of the API need that. So for some users, we might do overfetching. We might be fetching too much data. There is still a third solution, and it is still REST. Alice could go to Bob and ask, hey, can you change this API for me? And add a flag. And Bob would do something like this. The API here would return the product, and because there is a flag here with company equal true, then the company details would be added, and if you don't put this flag, company details are not added. So this is really better. But this leads us directly to what we could call flags hell. It means that for each consumer of your API, the consumer will come to the backend developer and say, hey, I need this small variant. Could you add a flag for me? And the backend developer will start to have a lot of things to maintain and a lot of flags to maintain. And this will make the code on the backend side really difficult. So GraphQL solves exactly the problem we just saw with REST. And GraphQL is a paradigm shift. The idea with GraphQL is that the client will ask the list of fields it wants, okay? So basically, this solves both overfetching and underfetching because it is the client, the front-end developer, that asks to the API what fields it wants. So when done with the GraphQL API asks exactly the same question, what Alice will do is she will first check the current request that is in the front-end code, and a GraphQL API looks like this. You see, I put it in several lines so you can read it easily. Basically, you always hit the API on the /GraphQL endpoint, and you pass the query as a parameter, and basically the query contains here the name of the query. So we want to fetch a product whose ID is 42, and below is a list of fields we require. And we can go in depth because if a product is linked to a company, we can fetch the data, the fields of the company too. And basically, Alice just has to change the request here, and maybe you see, maybe here I was not requesting the logo and I was fetching some details about the company, and now I want the logo of the product and I want the name of the country the company is in. And basically, Alice can change all this without asking anything to Bob, which is really, really very cool, right? So, success. Alice was able to perform the changes without contacting Bob. And this is one of the main points that is really cool with GraphQL. It is that it reduces the friction between a front-end developer and a back-end developer. So basically, front-end developers are free to ask whatever they want, and the API will answer, and they won't have to deal with the back-end code or to ask modifications to the back-end developer. Also, something really interesting is that if you have two slightly different APIs, for instance, if you have a web application and you have a mobile application, basically both APIs look quite often the same. You want to fetch the same kind of data, but often on the mobile API, for the mobile application, you don't need all the data that is displayed on the web application. Well, in this case, the GraphQL API really shines because you can use only one API and you don't have to adapt anything for the web or for the mobile part of your application. Okay, so that was why is GraphQL useful, but how does it work? Now we're going to dive a bit in the gory details of GraphQL. To understand how it works, you must first understand that it's built on a type system. GraphQL is what we call strongly typed. It comes with a schema language, and the schema language is used to describe the different objects and the different field of objects that we can retrieve, okay? Here, you can see that there is a type query. The type query is a special type that basically we have two queries, which are product and products. It is the equivalent of our API endpoints, right? So we can basically ask for a product or a list of products in this API. And basically it will return a product. What is a product? Definition is here. It has 4 possible fields: ID, name, logo, and company. And maybe a company is defined below by the type company, which has a set of fields, and so on and so on. Basically, a type in GraphQL is a bit like a class in an object-oriented language, except it does not have any methods. It only has properties. Okay? You need to be wary. The query language we saw earlier is different from the schema language. Basically, the query language lives in the browser. The browser sends queries to the server. And on the server, we have the schema language. Actually, you don't necessarily have the schema language. Some frameworks like GraphQL are generating this schema language for you. So you never see it, but it is always there behind the scene. Okay, and there is a clear distinction between the query language and the schema language. If we have a look a bit, and if we zoom on all those types here, you can see weird things. If you've got brackets like that around product, it means you are dealing with an array of product. Also, all types are by default nullable. They can be null, except if you add an exclamation mark at the end, which means that the string is non-nullable. Hence, if you see something a bit weird like this, it simply means that we have an array, and it is an array, it cannot be null, and inside the array we have products, and inside in the array we cannot have anything null. So it is an array of products. The array can be empty, it simply cannot be null. Here we also have some scalar types. Basically, it's types that are always existing in GraphQL. We have string, integers, float, booleans. We also have an AD type that is a unique identifier. So it's basically a string, except that it is used to represent the ID of an object. There is no native support for a date type out of the box in the GraphQL protocol. However, any GraphQL server has the possibility to add more custom scalar types. So usually you will have a date type. It's just that it is not the same between from one server to another. The date type can be different. Also, it has a support for arguments. So when you have a field here, the field can accept a number of arguments. Here, basically, when I'm fetching a product, I need to pass an ID field, which is of type ID. The type system is much, much more complex than what I just explained to you. It's really powerful. It supports interfaces if you want to do some inheritance. It has a support for union types, for input types. If you want to pass complex data to GraphQL, structured data to GraphQL especially. Also, GraphQL has a notion of mutations. So far, we only talked about queries, so a way to fetch data. But you can also use mutations to change data on the server side. So basically, queries would be the equivalent of a GET request in a REST API, and mutations are the equivalent of POST, PUT, DELETE request in a REST API. Also, something pretty cool, GraphQL has the notion of subscriptions. And basically, a subscription is a way to make a request to the server and to ask the server to be notified if anything changes. So it is a great way to do real-time communication with the server and get notified if something changes, like someone adds something to a chat room or something like that. Okay. So I already spoke a lot, and what we're going to do is, well, we are going. Oops, sorry. We are going to do a little demo, and you can try this. Your browser is open right now. You can try this with me. Sorry. And basically, the demo link, I'll copy the demo link in the chat. Here. Okay, so now you can click on it, and it should work quite correctly. So you should see something like this. You're arriving on GraphQL. And GraphQL is basically a development client for GraphQL to test your GraphQL API. So you can start by putting curly braces, and you can click Control Space, and you will see all the queries available. So I want to list a list of companies, and I'm going to put some brace, and I'm going to search for a company that contains the A key, put some curly braces here, and by pressing Control Space, I have a list of available fields. So here, basically, I'm going to write a query that is fetching all companies with the A letter, and I'm going to fetch the ID and the name of those companies. I'm going to click on the arrow here, and you see that I'm getting an answer from the server. And basically, the answer matches the structure I asked into the GraphQL query. And maybe if I want a website and I'm running the query again, I'm getting an additional website for those companies, right? And maybe I can even go in depth. For instance, I can ask for a list of products, and I want the ID and the name of those products. And suddenly I'm getting the companies and the products attached to those companies, right? I could even go further in depth and maybe ask for options attached to those products. And I'm getting each time something that maps the structure I asked into the query. So this is really the power of GraphQL, okay? You can play a bit with the API and try the queries yourself. One thing that is also important, I almost forgot to tell you about, is that because we have introspection, well, first of all, I get something, auto-completion. Also, if I'm typing something that is not correct, I'm getting an error message directly. And if I'm clicking on the Docs tab here, I can see directly into my browser the list of available queries, and I know that the company's query is returning a company type, and if I want to have a look at the company details, I can have a look at them here. Looking at the list of fields, I could have some documentation about those fields. I did not put any documentation here for the demo, but you can have the documentation here. So yes, the GraphQL API is self-describing, and this is very cool because basically you have the documentation if you have the GraphQL endpoint. Okay, so that was for the demo. You can play along with it if you want, and I'll go back to the presentation and talk to you a bit about the GraphQL ecosystem in general and in PHP in particular. So basically, when you're doing some GraphQL, you need two things. You need a GraphQL middleware. It sits on the server, and it will read the GraphQL queries, analyze the query the model of your application, and answer. And then you almost always need a GraphQL client, which is sitting in the browser and which will be doing GraphQL queries for you. For the front-end developer is using the client, the back-end developer is using the middleware here. If we're zooming a bit about all the available technologies, basically on the client port, we have Relay and Apollo, which are the two big players. There are many others out there. There is a GQLess that is gaining ground right now, but the big players are Relay and Apollo. I'll be talking about those later. You have also development clients. We already saw graphical in the demonstration. There is also other tools that exist like Altair or GraphQL Playground. And on the middleware side, well, it really depends on the language you are using. There are middlewares in JavaScript, in Node.js, in PHP, in Java, in .NET. Almost all the languages out there have a GraphQL implementation. In JavaScript, there is Express GraphQL that is provided by Facebook. There is Apollo Server, which is provided by Apollo, which is a company that is specialized into GraphQL, that is providing both a server and a client. There is Nest.js, which is a newcomer that is pretty cool. And what we're going to do now is we will be zooming on the PHP middlewares, because that's what I'm good at. I'm good at PHP. Yes, there are many libraries out there. Basically, if you look at middlewares in PHP, there are really two kinds of middlewares. There are what we call core libraries and wrapper libraries. A core library is kind of really low level. What it will do, it will take the GraphQL request, analyze it, parse it, it will serve request. It is really powerful, but the problem is that it's often really hard to use. So usually, on top of a core library, you use what I call a wrapper library, which is basically high-level, opinionated, and it is easier to use. If you are looking at core libraries, basically in PHP there are only two, Webonics and Railty, and actually Railty is in active development and it has not solid doc. It has no solid doc yet, so basically there is a de facto standard which is called Webonics. Okay, and everybody uses Webonics, and especially all the wrapper libraries out there are actually only wrappers around Webonics, GraphQL, PHP. If you look at the wrapper libraries, basically there is API platform and overblog GraphQL bundles that you can use with the Symfony framework. There is Lighthouse that you can use with Laravel. There is GraphQLite that I wrote, which is framework agnostic, so you can use it about everywhere. There are also specialized libraries, like one for WordPress, one for Drupal, and every CMS has a kind of a GraphQL wrapper around it. Let's make a quick zoom on Webonics. Okay, so Webonics, it is the low-level library, the one that is hard to use. I'll show you how it works. Don't worry if you don't know too much about PHP, this won't last too long. So basically, if we want to define a GraphQL type that looks like this, using Webonics, we will need to write this blob of code. So basically, we want to create a new object type. Its name is story. Okay, it's a story. It has some fields here, body, author, and likes. And basically, for those fields, I need to pass the type of the field. So if the type of the field is user, it will be stored into another variable and defined somewhere in the application. And I need to put a resolver. And a resolver is basically a function that would be called to fetch, in the author case, basically, I'm being passed the story, and I'm getting the data from the user as an answer to this resolver. Oh, I see. Someone is trying. Sorry, I see. Okay. Is there a problem with the connection? I'm supposed. Okay, can everyone see my screen correctly? Oh, okay, good. Okay, so, well, then let's continue the presentation. Okay, so basically, with Webonics, you need to, when you want to execute a query, you pass in the schema, which is basically a structure that contains all the types. You pass in the query string, and it will return an array that contains the result. And you use it like that. The problem is that, well, it is kind of a lot of work to use, especially compared to a REST API. And basically, if you are using Webonics directly, the amount of work it requires for you does not offset the gains of using GraphQL. The gains, it's client-driven, it's self-described, it has strict types, but if it requires too much work, it's not worth the effort. And so we will be using a GraphQL wrapper library to offset the costs and to make sure that it is worthwhile to use a GraphQL library. It must be easier, okay? So how do you choose a library that is easier to use, a high-level library? Well, there are two kinds of such libraries. And I say that in the PHP world, but it is also true in Node, in .NET, in Java, and so on. Basically, there are libraries that are schema first, And in those libraries, you are typing the GraphQL schema in a file, and then the library will try to find a way to link the schema to your code. And there are code-first libraries. And in this scenario, you design your code first. So you code in PHP, Java, whatever. And then the library will find a way to generate the schema. In PHP, basically, there is an even split between schema-first libraries and code-first libraries. If you're using a language that is really typed, you will tend to have code-first library like in Java. And in JavaScript, which has no strong type, you will tend to see more schema-first libraries. Let's make a quick zoom on those libraries. I'll first zoom on Lighthouse. Okay, so Lighthouse, it's a library that is used with the Laravel framework. It is schema first. When you use Lighthouse, basically, the backend developer will type the schema like this. And you can see there are kind of annotations that start with the ampersand here. We call them directives in GraphQL. And those directives are used by the server to understand how the type should be bound to the objects in Laravel. So basically, if I'm running the me query, the auth directive will tell me that basically when the me query is called, I should answer with the user that is currently connected. If you are looking at the mutations below, there is a create post mutation. There is a create directive that is basically saying, when I receive some data, please give me put this data in a post in database directly. And the rules directive are telling me the rules that I need to validate the directive first. The data first. So it's very, very efficient. Basically, you only write a schema and you got a working application. It is also very tied to ORM and to Eloquent, to Laravel actually. So you can get started really, really easily with such a thing. It's maybe a bit hard if you have some specific things to do. If we have a look at the other kind of libraries, which are code-first libraries, well, here you have an example with API platform, which is used in Symfony. And basically, you put annotations in your code, and the annotation will tell your GraphQL library how to use, what to expose. So here we're saying the offer class should have a query bound to it. Okay. I'll now make a zoom on GraphQLite. Okay, so basically GraphQLite is a code-first library, just like API platform. And the idea behind GraphQLite is that I want to simplify the way you can develop, well, let me show you a sample, sorry. Here we have a sample query, it is GraphQL. I want to code this query in PHP, okay? And basically this query is doing an echo, it's taking a message and it will return a message out. It is the hello world of GraphQL. If I want to do that with Webonics, I have to write this complex query with my echo field that is taking in parameter a string and a string in parameter that is returning a string. And basically when I'm calling this field, it will return exactly what was passed in. So basically, it will do an echo. This is the Webonics version. The thing is that if you do that in pure PHP, an echo in PHP would look like that. I mean, I have a function, I pass in an argument, I have the return type, and my resolver here, which is the body of the function. And when you look at this function, which is pure PHP, basically you have everything you need to do some GraphQL. So basically, you have the query name, that is actually the name of the function. You have the list of arguments, the return type, and the resolver. So what would be really, really cool is what if we could simply put an annotation, maybe a query annotation here, yeah? And GraphQL would figure out for us how, by applying introspection to the PHP code, GraphQL will figure out what to do and will create the GraphQL type for us. This is cool because PHP already has type. And so we can convert those PHP types to GraphQL types. And if you think about it, it's a bit akin to what we do with Doctrine. If some of you are using Doctrine in Symfony, basically in Doctrine, you put annotations in the PHP object, it generates the database model for you. Here, you put annotations in the PHP object, and it will generate the GraphQL schema for you. So GraphQL is framework agnostic. I already told that. It is available in PHP 7.2, and it's based on Webonics. It just converts PHP to Webonics types. And I'll try to make a live demo, so I hope it will work. It's always a bit dangerous to do live demos, but well, let's try it. Okay. So basically, here I have a company controller, and basically I have this function that is returning a list of companies. This is the function we used earlier in the demo, right? And so basically what I'm going to do, I want to expose this as a GraphQL query. So I'm going to add a query annotation, okay? I hope you can see that. And then I'll go back to, and this should be enough, right? So I'm going to test that right now. Uh-oh, sorry. I'm sure I can make this work. Jesus. Live demo effects. Okay, it's working. Oof. And okay, so here is what I'm getting. Oh, I'm getting an error. So let's make a zoom on this error. And basically, GraphQL is telling me, in my getCompanies method, a type int is missing. All right. What is going on? Let's have a look. Indeed, in the getCompanies method, I did not specify a return type. Because PHP is optionally typed, but GraphQL must have a type. So I need to tell my PHP class what it is returning, and it is actually returning an array of companies, okay? So let's go back, and let's try this again. I'm refreshing the page, and oh, I'm getting another error. Okay, let's zoom on this error. It is error-driven development. I love that. And so basically, for the getCompanies method here, I cannot map the class company to a GraphQL type. What it means is that here I have a type company, but I did not GraphQL that this is an existing GraphQL type. How to do that? I'm going to jump into the class company, and I'm simply going to add a type annotation, which is basically saying this company, this class, is a GraphQL type. Also, I need to put fields into that type, and I can do that also using the field annotation. And I'm putting this field annotation on the getters. So I'm putting the field annotation on ID, on name, and on website. Let's try this again. And at this point, I should not have any error. However, yeah, I'm getting some auto-completion. It seems to be working. And I'm getting an answer from the API. So basically, that is what GraphQL is, what GraphQL working with GraphQL looks like. you go in your code, you put some annotations, and you get a GraphQL API, and it's really, really, really easier. Now, let's say I want to go in depth into products. I'm going to put a field on the get products function here. I'm going to refresh my page, and oh, another error. Okay, what is going on? I cannot map the class product to a non-GraphQL type. At this point, I'm sure you understood what is going on. I need to say that the product class also has a type. And basically, I need to put annotations in the fields I want to expose. Maybe the ID field, the name field, the price field. Let's try this. I'm refreshing. And now, yeah, I've got auto completion on products, and maybe I want to be the name and the price of the products. Ta-da! It's working. So, yeah, that was it for the demo. So I hope this gave you a glimpse of what it is to work with GraphQLite or with a GraphQL library that is using annotations to define the schema. I want to talk now a little bit about performance, because performance is something you need to keep in mind when you do GraphQL. Performance is usually excellent because, as we saw earlier, there is no overfetching. We don't fetch too much data, and there is no underfetching, which means that we can fetch all the data in only one query. However, you have to be wary of something. GraphQL itself is really fast, but it is kind of easy to jump into what we call the N+1 problem. It is quite easy to write slow queries in GraphQL. Let me explain to you. You see this query. Basically, we are fetching a list of companies. Maybe there are 100 companies that will be returned by this query, okay? And for each company, we want to fetch the list of products associated to the company. If we are doing a naive implementation of GraphQL, it is quite easy to write an application that will perform one query to fetch the product for the list of products for each company. And that would be really bad because we would be fetching, we would be doing one query for the company's list and 100 queries for the products list, one for each company. And this is something you really want to avoid because this will break the performance of your application. How can you avoid this N+1 problem? Well, you could either analyze the GraphQL queries and do the joins accordingly. The problems with this approach is that it's quite difficult to implement. Or you can use what is called the data loader pattern. I'm just dropping the name here. I'm not going to dive too much into the details because I have a limited amount of time. But if you are interested, it is something that is really well documented. It is a design pattern that is promoted by Facebook, and that allows you to limit the number of requests you're going to do to the database quite easily. Also, I'm hoping that this N+1 problem in the future will be directly solved not by the GraphQL layer, but by the underlying layer of the ORMs. So the tools that are used to access the database directly. I'm actually working on one of those tools right now, and I hope to have a few results in a few months. We are almost done. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the front-end side, because so far we have been talking about the back-end side. On the front-end, basically, you have two kinds of clients. Either you use a lightweight client that is simply doing a simple wrapper around the browser API to ease the way you can do some GraphQL, or you can use a full-featured client that will manage for you the cache, that will do some generation of types. Basically, There are many lightweight clients out there. There are only two full-featured clients, which is Apollo and Relay. Relay is the client that is provided by Facebook. Okay, it is really powerful, but you need to be using React, which is the front-end library by Facebook, to be able to use Relay. Also, it comes with a set of restriction of the GraphQL schema. If you want to use Relay, your GraphQL schema must answer a certain number of constraints. For instance, all the objects must have an ID field, they must implement a given interface, stuff like that. So if you want to use Relay, you need to use a GraphQL server that is compatible with Relay, like Lighthouse, for instance. For instance, GraphQLite is not compatible with Relay. So if you want to use Relay, do not use GraphQLite. And the other big player out there is Apollo. And Apollo is framework agnostic. You can use any front-end framework with Apollo, Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, whatever. The way you work with Apollo is that basically you put a GraphQL query in the Apollo component. Apollo will take in charge the query and will feed the data directly into a sub-component that you are writing, and that will simply handle the way you display things. Also, something really interesting is that GraphQL has types, and TypeScript has types. So on the front end, if you're doing some TypeScript, it makes a lot of sense to propagate those types to TypeScript. And you can do that, for instance, with Apollo. Basically, Apollo can take the types from the server, from the queries, and merge them into TypeScript types, which is really, really cool, because basically it means that you simply have to generate the types with a tool that is called GraphQL CodeGen. And as a front-end developer, you only need to write the query, run Apollo CodeGen, and it will generate for you whatever is useful for your application. For instance, if you are using React, it will use React hooks. Okay, and basically here, if I have a company's query, it will generate a use company's query hook that I can use directly in my application, and it is completely typed. So it is really, really useful because I gain all the benefits of TypeScript while using GraphQL. And if you're using GraphQLite, it's even better because you can code some classes in PHP. Those types will be converted to GraphQL, which will be converted into TypeScript. And basically, if you are refactoring something here and changing the name of a property, well, it will be impacted in the TypeScript types. And basically, if you forgot to change the name of the property in one of your scripts in TypeScript, you will be notified directly. So it makes refactoring really, really easy. Check it out. That was it. Let's jump to the conclusion. Should we use GraphQL everywhere? Yeah. I hope I managed to show you that using the right tools, it is almost trivial to create a GraphQL API. And because it is trivial, it is almost easier to start a GraphQL API than a REST API. At the coding machine, it makes a lot of sense to use GraphQL in most of our projects because we like the way it separates the front end and the back end. It reduces the friction, as I told you. Also, at the coding machine, we are doing a lot of intranet and extranet websites, which have a limited amount of users. If you are developing front-facing websites and you want to expose a public GraphQL API, you should really be aware of the N+1 performance issue. And it will require you some work. So think twice before exposing a GraphQL API to the public. However, if you're using an intranet, an extranet application or if you are basically having a limited number of users, and if performance issues are not a problem regarding the N+1 performance issue, go for GraphQL. It is really a fantastic tool. Okay. Regarding GraphQLite, I only showed you 3 annotations. It is a full framework. There are a lot of annotations out there that you can use to manage pagination, authentication, security, whatever. I'm not going to dive into the details, but feel free to come and talk to me about it just in 5 minutes. I put the link to the documentation here too. And yeah, basically that's it. I hope I was not too long. And yeah, do you have any questions?
Thanks, David, for sharing. We do actually have one question from the audience, so I'll just read it out to you. So the question is, after development with GraphQL Schema, which is a great advantage, how to disable?
Oh, okay. This is a really good question. Most of the GraphQL libraries out there will let you disable the schema. There is an option to do that. Actually, it's not implemented in GraphQL yet. I'm planning to do that in the coming months. But for instance, if you're using Webonics, there is an option to make the schema private. Now, I would like to just warn you a bit about this. It's not because your schema is private that no one can guess what it is. Because by looking at the requests that are done in your application, you can, by looking at the JavaScript actually, you can see all the, in a single page application, you can see all the requests that the application can do. So basically, it must not give you a false sense of security, right? Basically, hiding the schema is good, but be sure to secure your endpoint and to do the appropriate security checks in the controllers or when you are resolving the fields. And be sure there are security must be at this layer. Hiding the schema is good, but it's only optional, and it's not what will give you true security.
Okay, so I'm a little bit mindful of time because we have run over a little bit. So we do.
I'm sorry.
No problem. We do have a couple of questions more, but please, guys, find David outside in the networking part, and you can ask him those questions yourself. But for now, I just want to introduce Charles and Xavier, who are based at the Coding Machine here in Hong Kong, to share a couple of things with you. We are running a little bit over time, so I do apologize for that, but stay tuned.
I'm really sorry.
It's no worries. So Charles and Xavier, if you'd like to come on.
Yes. Hello, everyone here. So I'm now regional director from the Coding Machine in Hong Kong. So very glad to be here with you to listen to our CTO's speech. Personally, I have learned a lot from him and appreciate his knowledge and experience. So hope you have learned something today, and we are free to discuss outside of conference.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. This was our first developer event here in Hong Kong, and the same with Wanted Jobs. So we are happy to share this event with you, and we hope it was very valuable content. And please share your feedbacks afterwards. Cheers.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're going to move out into networking. So for those of you who weren't able to see it at the very beginning of the event, you will come out into a virtual room that has a number of tables. So all you have to do is double click onto a table to join and make sure that your camera and microphone is on so that you can interact and talk with other individuals on your table. There's a maximum of 6 people per table. Mindful of that. And you'll see that at the bottom of each table is a little sentence. So each table has a subject, and you are very welcome to talk about that subject or just to network and talk about what you've learned today. So without further ado, let's hop out into networking, and the platform will be open until 8 p.m. But if you have to dash before that, that's no problem. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you found it useful. And I will see some of you out there in the networking session. So thank you and goodbye.